In this age of indie games being more accessible and ubiquitous than ever, there are talented individuals and teams out there doing their own renditions of just about every long dormant series you can think of, and if it isn't already out there, it's probably being made as you're watching this. But while it's understandable there are people out there doing homages to the greats of retro RPGs, platformers, shooters and the like, there's also those taking a shot at some of the more maligned games of old. We already saw that this year with Bubsy 4D, which seems to be considered pretty decent, but 2024 also gave us Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, paying tribute to the Philips CDI Legend of Zelda duology of all games. Now, these games' reputations precede them. They're considered barely playable borefests with some of the most awkwardly animated and voiced cutscenes out there. There's a reason Nintendo doesn't acknowledge their existence to this day. Though they have been prime fuel for 20 years worth of YouTube poops, which has basically been their entire legacy, reaching millions who have never and probably will never play the games themselves.
Long as there's two people left on the planet, someone is going to want someone dead.
You want it? Bombs, bombs, bombs.
This reputation led to this game being made with a simple mission statement. What if we tried to make a game with the offbeat wackiness of the CDI titles, but actually made a decent game out of it? Certainly a bold endeavour, but how did it turn out? If you're remotely familiar with the story of Zelda Wand of Gamelon, even vicariously from watching it in YouTube poop form, then you pretty much know what happens in this game. It's a lot of the same beats with the names and designs swapped out. Being a pure evil has been released from containment, the denizens of the kingdom are helpless to stop him, warrior princess must take up arms and destroy him and save everyone. Along the way you encounter all manner of offbeat characters with bizarre mannerisms and a love for getting way too close to the camera. It does a pretty accurate job of replicating the very awkward way everything was shot and animated in the CDI games, right down to the weird voice direction. It becomes very clear that the cutscenes were handled by many different people though. Throughout you could see the ever so slightly different changes in the art style, the most jarring of which had to be one of the main story cutscenes which was very clearly rotoscoped over 3D models. My favourites were probably the ones with Count Denny. The line art was smooth and expressive, and this was probably the best Arzette looked throughout the whole game. I also give the team credit for not constantly making references to existing YouTube poops for the sake of comedy, since that would have absolutely been the easiest thing to do. By my count, there were 2 offhand references that pop up in non-animated dialogue, which wasn't too in your face. The problem that comes with something like this though is that the comedy and awkward charm don't hit as much when it's being tongue-in-cheek. The shopkeeper is trying to be extravagant, but he can't compare to Morshu's wacky movement and speech inflections. The king in here is just boring compared to King Harkinian. That Link XP is as annoying as he is useless. And Daima? He's no Ganon, that's for sure. He's someone who at the very least could stand to be hamming it up a bit more. I also wasn't a huge fan of Arzette as a character. She's just kind of rolling her eyes at most of the people she comes across like she's aware of how wacky the world she inhabits is. I always prefer protagonists and setups like this when played a bit more sincerely, you know? But enough about the cutscenes, there is an actual game attached here. I've not actually played the CDI games, nor have most people, but impressions I've gotten from people who have is that it's the kind of thing you only play out of novelty just to say that you did. It's essentially a very bland side-scroller, like a worse version of Zelda 2. Arzette presents itself as a pretty basic action platformer game, with a pseudo-Metroidvania progression system. You start out in a level and linearly progress through them, getting through platforming gauntlets and enemy setup until you reach a scroll to send you back home. It starts out pretty boring honestly, the first level isn't anything special. But as you go along, you're given a handful of side quests and unlock new items. These encourage you to revisit levels you've already finished to find new abilities or discover pathways you couldn't previously access. Replaying stages can be a bit of a pain though due to the linear nature. If you gain a new ability that lets you destroy certain types of barriers, and that certain barrier is right at the end of a level, you're going to have to go through that entire level again to get there. They're not overly long or anything, but it makes repeat visits feel like a slog when you're doing it multiple times. Things pick up a little more once you gain abilities like faster movement and the double jump, but the combat is incredibly rudimentary. A lot of the same types of enemies are encountered throughout, with the only ones posing a challenge being the mooks that take multiple hits. I get these guys have iframes so you can't just spam them to death, but they remain invincible just long enough that it really breaks the pace. I would have preferred them doing something like counter-attacking to dissuade the player from getting too reckless. The boss fights were decent at least, each having a unique approach that incorporates some light puzzle and platforming elements to mix things up, although that final boss with Daima was kind of underwhelming, pretty much just a not particularly difficult platforming gauntlet. Arzette is a bit of a novelty title. Once you get past the idea that people decided to do a game paying homage to the Legend of Zelda CDI games, what's left is a pretty standard action platformer that doesn't do much else to stand out from the crowd. I enjoyed it more than Zelda 2 at the very least, for all that's worth. I've always been very fond of the Klonoa duology, some of my all-time favourite games. However, there were a handful of side games in the series I never got around to, with the Game Boy Advance duology in particular that I have owned for quite a while now. So no emulators this time, I'm firing up the Micro and playing it the old-fashioned way. The two PlayStation releases were the only games held by series creator Hideo Yoshizawa. Beach volleyball doesn't count, shut up. So I was never sure where, or if anywhere, these spin-offs fit into the larger picture. Klonoa 1 and 2 technically connect, even if they can largely be enjoyed as standalone experiences. The handheld spin-offs, on the other hand, seem to take place in their own pocket continuities. Empire of Dreams, for instance, kicks off with Klonoa appearing in a new land in his get-up from the second game, but then Hupo shows up and the two just carry on as if that little blue bastard didn't rip our hearts out in Daughter Phantom Isle. You're gonna have to not question that because it never gets brought up anywhere. The game takes place in the Empire of Gilius, where the eponymous emperor has put Klonoa on trial for dreaming. He claims it's a waste of time. As punishment, Klonoa is tasked with visiting different areas around the land, clearing several levels and then a boss fight at the end. But things don't quite seem right, as each boss encountered turns out to be regular denizens transformed by a mysterious mist. Klonoa and Hupo then have to travel the land to get down to the bottom of this mystery. While the original Klonoa had each vision feature 2 levels and a boss fight at the end, each zone in Empire of Dreams has 7 levels and a boss at the end. It's in a handheld format though, so the levels are much shorter to accommodate bus commutes or trips to the toilet. The controls of the Klonoa games were always very simple, so they naturally had no problem translating to the Game Boy Advance. What did have to be compromised though was the level design. Klonoa was one of the pioneers of the 2.5D platformer subgenre, along with the likes of Pandemonium. The GBA can't pull this off, obviously, so the setting is now in the form of a much more standard 2D platformer. Most levels have you going from point A to B, trying to find 3 stars to open the exit gate and move on. Dreamstones return, but regular stages only have 30 to find compared to the usual 150 from the PlayStation games, so they're strictly there for collectible reasons. To compensate for the more limited level design, the game introduces a bevy of new mechanics not seen in the console titles. Stuff like move blocks which can be picked up and moved around, directional arrows that can carry fodder and blocks around to heights you otherwise can't reach, that sort of thing. They start out pretty simplistic and not particularly interesting early on, but the latter half of the game throws tons of elements together for some great puzzles. There are many satisfying aha moments to be had. It is possible to softlock yourself in a room if you do something wrong, but the game thankfully has a room-by-room checkpoint system. Hitting retry from the pause menu will reload your progress in the current room rather than restart the entire level from scratch like the console games. Being from an age before handhelds could have their power suspended, this checkpoint system also allows you to turn the system off at a moment's notice and pick back up exactly in the same room you were in. This was very much appreciated when I was finishing my lunch breaks halfway through a level. As if to muscle in on Mario's territory, there are the occasional auto-scroller levels too. Due to the more linear nature of these, the Dreamstone number is bumped up to 100. Lastly is the board levels, effectively a 2D rendition of the board stages from Lunatia's Veil. Though these ones don't tend to give you much of a clue as to what's coming up and suffer from a bit of screen crunch, so these ones were easily my least favourite. Not needlessly difficult or anything, just not particularly interesting or enjoyable. Honestly, the auto-scrollers are much worse if you're going for all the Dreamstones because you're put in many do-or-die situations. Trying to 100% the board levels is a great way of accruing lives, while trying to 100% the auto-scrollers is a great way to lose them. The bosses are pretty straightforward. They carry on the series tradition of the character outright telling you their weakness before most of them, but they're all trapped to a single plane, which doesn't leave them much room for too many tricky maneuvers. The first boss, for instance, is basically Rongo Lango again. Wait for him to jump over you and then throw a moo at his back. Then you have the third boss, which is kind of like Gelg Bolm, in the sense of trying to time attacks from above. Visually, the game looks really good for an early GBA title. Great use of colour and some smoothly animated sprites. Level theming leaves much to be desired though. It's unfair to compare it to the console games in this regard, but a lot of the stages really do blend together. Each vision does have a distinct theme, but individual levels are borderline interchangeable. Sound design is also pretty solid, carrying over many of the sounds and voice clips from Lunatia's Veil without coming across as too bit crushed. The music, unfortunately, is very run-of-the-mill GBA tunes. They went in one ear and out the other. It hurts extra because the soundtrack of the console games are absolute works of art, easily in my top 5 of all time. Klonoa Empire of Dreams was pretty enjoyable. Not quite as rich in experience as the console titles, but there's still plenty to love here. Some really enjoyable puzzles and enough levels to rack up a runtime similar to Daughter Phantom Isle. If you're a fan of the PlayStation titles and never played this one, be sure to check it out. You may just be pleasantly surprised. Taking further advantage of the privilege of having a friend with an Ace VR setup, I'm once again venturing back into the VR space to check out the last remaining Sam & Max game I haven't played. Sam & Max, this time it's virtual. I've become a big fan of these two goofballs in recent years from my time playing the entire Telltale saga, the LucasArts game, and even the Fox animated show. Still need to try hunting down some copies of the comics at some point. Sam & Max, this time it's virtual, takes a much different approach to the standard fare, putting you in the shoes of a hapless mute who stumbles upon the dynamic duo during a showdown with an interdimensional monster. Your ability to sidestep its slow projectiles and fire rockets into its heads grants you the honor of joining their ranks in the freelance police. But obviously there's an initiation that has to take place first. The mission structure in this game wavers between sequences. You have a few cases that most resemble their adventure game routes, exploring an environment and finding the requisite items to solve puzzles. And between these you have the initiation missions at a busted theme park, with these all taking the form of a variety of what I can only really describe as a grab bag of token VR minigames, obstacle courses, shooting galleries, and even an escape room, which was probably the highlight of these particular challenges. I'm still mad at myself for overthinking the solution to the fridge magnet clue though. I was including the first sentence as well as the individual words, which really fucked me over. It is neat that the setup is different each time though. I much preferred the case portions of this game to the very monotonous minigames at the theme park, since these had some neat brain teasers and plenty more interactions with Sam and Max themselves. There were a lot of gameplay elements that certainly felt unrefined, though. A lot of small moments of jank that began to pile up and even cause frustration when trying to solve puzzles. Sorting out the demons in the grocery store had me thinking I was getting certain correct solutions wrong, because getting the demons to correctly react to the items was being frequently troublesome. My most hated though would have to be the talking head puzzles. Remember Bop It's? It's basically one of those. These are pretty straightforward, but there were so many times where for the life of me it felt like a roll of the die if the game would register my actions, which would cause the head to explode and make me start from scratch. Presentation was also a bit spotty in places. Character models looked great and they were beautifully animated, but many of the environments looked pretty rough. A lot of distractingly low quality textures and incredibly noticeable pop-in were abundant throughout the entire game. The exploration in the final sequence could have used some refining as well. I play VR with full movement controls because motion sickness has no power over me, but there's some platforms to reach a higher area that can only be traversed by switching to the teleport movement options. Going between this section and anywhere else, I found myself having to switch between the two in the menu. I wasn't going to stay doing teleport movement because I hate playing this way. It feels like shit. There were some bright spots though. A few sequences let you ride a hoverboard that you control with a wrist-mounted device. This was not only exhilarating to experience, but it controlled like a dream. Very satisfying segments to play. And as always, the comedy writing is top-notch. I could listen to these two banter with each other for hours on end. There's so much offbeat humor and out-of-pocket lines that got many laughs out of me. It's one of the reasons I always love checking out more of the stuff in this series.
When you get a chance, I'd like to go over a few of the ground rules before we invite you back for this year's career day. Bye!
I bet she's still upset about the tasing incident with the prom queen.
She was coming right at me, Sam.
This time its virtual had some neat ideas and enjoyable comedy, but the actual game aspect was a bit hit and miss. Probably not one I see myself going back to. If you love Sam & Max and have a VR setup, then I'd say maybe still check this out if you can get it on sale. Just temper your expectations. If playing in VR isn't on the cards for you though, be it from financial or motion sickness limitations, I can absolutely recommend watching 99th VR's playthrough, which is the footage you've been seeing here. They do a fantastic job of adding a ton of character and humor to the gameplay entirely through hand gestures with no dialogue. It's a full-on performance art and a cut above your average playthroughs. Be sure to go show them some love. You know something that I really hate? When I look online for lists of hidden gem games for a certain console, and most of those lists are populated by games that are available on multiple other platforms. If I'm looking up hidden gem digital-only games on the Switch, why am I being recommended stuff like Donut County, Earthlock, or Pode, which are available pretty much everywhere? Meanwhile, actual digital-only Switch-exclusive hidden gems like Omochapon I only learn about from randos on Twitter. Omochapon is pretty neat, by the way, go check it out. Anyway, this was especially dire when I was hunting down all the must-have digital releases on the Wii U before its online services got shut down in 2023. Because if for some reason you weren't aware, the Wii U has no games. Every remotely interesting looking digital game I was recommended on the Wii U eShop sure enough also had a release on Steam. And if I'm having to settle for a digital only release, I'm gonna get it on Steam, not the fucking Wii U. Which brings us to one of the handful of games that fell into this category for me, Year Walk. Year Walk is about Okay, I'm honestly not entirely sure what this was about. Something about doing a year-long walk in a snowy area and coming across a variety of entities from Scandinavian folklore. It has a pretty unique presentation, having you explore the field by moving left to right and occasionally finding clearings to move north and south, solving a variety of puzzles along the way. Some were pretty neat, like the one involving a spirit you had to locate by following the correct frequencies of her voice. Others were obtuse enough I ended up just consulting a guide. I don't know if I missed something, but how were you supposed to know the sequence to walk around the church? The visual design was pretty nice, with the sort of understated, low colour, soft painted sort of look it was going for. The snowy atmosphere felt extra immersive since I ended up playing this at 2 AM on a cold winter's morning. Forecast said it was -2 degrees Celsius outside and it felt like it. Playing it well after dark also ended up being a good choice because I had no idea there were horror elements to this game. A few sequences that were quite unsettling with the almost uncanny and otherworldly way everything was presented. Despite the name, Year Walk is a pretty brisk game that you can finish in just under an hour. Neat to experience in the moment, but some of the puzzles were a bit god dang it for my liking, and the story was very interpretive for better or worse. We're well into the winter now, so I almost want to pick up a more tropical game for a bit of contrast. Well, I said I wanted something more tropical, but I guess tropical storms will have to do. If there's anything I don't think I've indulged in for quite a long time, it's a game where you play as a complete dick. I found this game in my passing while browsing the Steam store and picked it up because the premise seemed amusing. You play as a sentient rain cloud who travels across the land, raining down everywhere it goes and causing mayhem to everyone involved. A lot of embellishments are made with it being shown through the lens of a grandpa telling a bedtime story to his grandchild. Because of the abstract storyteller nature, it has a nice handcrafted look to it, which I always appreciate. Right near the start, you're even given the option to draw a custom face for your cloud. There we go. Now this is the face of a cumulus cretin callously causing catastrophes. The general gameplay of Rain on Your Parade centers around plopping you into a scene with a series of goals to accomplish. A few mandatory for finishing the stage, and some others which are there for completionists who want to go the extra mile. Usually standard stuff like soak every last person or destroy a structure, with some bonuses like scare a classroom down the hall into another room or avoid damaging a certain object in the crossfire. You're not just limited to rain though. Certain levels allow you to absorb other liquids to cause chaos, like invoking acid rain to destroy a farm and raining down oil to cause a warehouse fire. You're also gradually given extra power-ups to add more strings to your bow, giving you both more destructive capabilities when revisiting old levels and means to take out obstacles going forward. Targets are under shelter or holding umbrellas, witness the mighty power of Zeus. This'll blow you away. Let's try to be cool about this, fellas. I'll stop. A few levels mix up the mission-based structure to not just purely causing chaos, but also reaching a general objective, like a few stages that spoof old games with different theming and end goals, or one where you have to herd a bunch of sheep into a pen while making sure none of them filthy black sheep get in there. A lot of it is just harmless fun, but the goals on each level can feel a little at odds with the tone. For instance, there's one level where you're raining down to make trees and other plants grow in a sterile central city park, but you're instructed not to rain down on any of the kids playing there because they're more innocent than the rest of the human targets. But then you get to some of the others and holy shit, I am setting a bunch of kids on fire just because another kid didn't get invited to this birthday party. Grandpa, what is your problem? Yeah, they're all yarn people so the violence doesn't amount to anything, but still. This makes for a lot of variety in the level structure that keeps things from getting too monotonous throughout the journey, with the base game alone having around 50 stages to clear. There's something about this game that really does bother me though, and it's this. I've railed in the past about how I hate mimetic humor being used in things, because it's such a shortcut to dating yourself, and frankly, it's lazy. I haven't seen anything quite as bad as Ratchet & Clank Full Frontal Assault or Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, but this skirts the line sometimes. I was thinking about the latter a lot especially because the way this game is written reminded me a lot of it. Even the little things like referring to humans as humans, and generally having the kind of dialogue that makes it feel like you're on Tumblr circa 2014, tailor-made to get chuckles out of developmentally stunted millennials who refer to their overweight cats as chonkers. But that was 2014, and this game came out 5 years ago, which can make it feel like a time capsule of the worst kind. I mean, come on, Doge speak? In 2021? Seriously? Even Doge memes themselves evolved like 6 different times and moved past that by the second half of the 2010s. Rest in peace, Kabosu, the internet just hasn't been as funny since you passed on. Any aspiring developers currently sneaking a 6-7 or tong 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 sahur joke into their game, please, there is still time to walk it back. It's not too late. All that aside, I really liked Rain on Your Parade. It was an enjoyable and cathartic romp that does a whole lot with a very simple premise and has a lot of charm in its presentation. If you want to pick it up, try to get the complete edition on sale since the DLC stages are also a lot of fun. So between parts I decided to make a big investment. After almost 20 years of doing a lot of my gaming on a variety of laptops, I finally took on the PC gamer rite of passage and built my own desktop rig. Picked a pretty lousy time to do it, but considering the market is likely only going to keep getting worse for the foreseeable future thanks to Silicon Valley's hard-on for AI, I'm biting the bullet now if only to future-proof myself. I've been using my trusty Acer Predator since 2018. I can easily get even more mileage out of a monster setup like this. But I was thinking over what would be a good title to cover with all the extra horsepower I now have, and something had come to mind. Yes, really. This is a sequel to a game called False Dream that I played a couple years back. It revolves around an experiment where you sleep in an apartment building and have to check out the layout upon waking up to find if anything is wrong. It was my introduction to the anomaly hunter genre that an old friend recommended to me, and I quite enjoyed it. I then decided to try out the sequel False Mall a couple months back, and holy hell, this game is surprisingly taxing. My laptop could run False Dream no problem, but False Mall? Not a chance. Damn you, Unreal Engine 5. I've talked before about how I've become pretty numb to horror, largely things trying way too hard to be scary with loud noises, jump scares, and gruesome imagery. I find it more tiresome than anything. More subtle stuff like this does it for me though, unassuming environments where there's that ever so slight hint that something isn't quite right, but whether something is actually off or not isn't immediately clear. These aren't even outright scary or anything, just unsettling. Good atmosphere does it for me way more than any spooky monster you can throw at me. I've played through Fear enough times that I know where every scare in the game is, but its atmosphere still makes me uneasy to this day, even if I know there's nothing there. Most anomaly hunters I've played lean more into the uneasy atmosphere over monsters and jump scares, which makes them good entry-level horror games for people who don't do well with monster encounters. The only ones I can think of that had several monster encounters in a sense would only be Shinkansen Zero and 10 Bells. Most others would have one or maybe two anomalies that could cause a failure state from player inaction. As with other Anomaly Hunter games, you'll spend your whole time checking rooms from top to bottom trying to find anything that looks out of place. But as you're still early on, you'll notice new details you didn't see before, and keep wondering if that's the anomaly or if it was there the whole time. By the time you're a few loops in, you'll know these areas back to front and your third eye will open to anything that feels out of place. You'll have to go on a loop of the same room trying to spot these anomalies and trying to make the choice of whether you've seen something off or not. Like many others, you need to get through enough correct guesses in a row to escape the cycle. There are few things as gutting as getting a good streak in an Anomaly Hunter game and having your progress reset because it turns out you missed something. Though in False Mall at the start of each loop you actually get a map that will point out the locations of anomalies you may have missed. In theory it seems like it'd make things too easy, but it can be a helpful nudge in the right direction if you mess up a run with multiple entities you had to snap and didn't have the direction or sufficient clues to find it. Most others in the genre use the simple mechanic of proceeding through the loop if you've seen nothing, and going back the way you came if you do find something wrong. Much like False Dream, this game uses a photography mechanic to capture anomalies. There's a lot less guesswork about whether or not you got something wrong though. If you snap something that you thought was an anomaly but wasn't, the power will fluctuate, you'll be locked out of taking more photos, and you'll be forced to carry on to reset the loop. Some anomalies can have multiple entities that need to be captured though, so you have to find all the items in common and take snaps of them. You'll know you've done it right when your camera is locked off and you hear the door open. I do appreciate the effort to change things up a little. False Dream was set in an average sized apartment, so based off the name alone I thought False Mall would be a lot bigger and difficult because of it, but it's really not. The total map size isn't that much bigger since it only takes place in a cordoned off corridor of a larger facility. Of all the Anomaly Hunters I've played, this one is visually the most reminiscent of Exit 8, which pretty much started this whole trend. It's kind of disappointing because I liked the way False Dream was set in a more homely setting without level design based around walking a loop. False Mall on the other hand feels a lot safer, falling into the Anomaly Hunter trap where they're either using Exit 8 or Platform 8 as their template, since corridors and train passages are easy to build loops around. It'd be cool to get one of these set in something like a market, or around the side of a house, or even a hospital. Now there's some spooky potential. False Mall is overall a pretty standard Anomaly Hunter that unfortunately feels like a step back from its predecessor. False Dream had a unique setting not requiring you to walk the level in a loop like most other games in the genre, and a lot of really interesting imagery and anomalies to be found. False Mall, meanwhile, just feels like another shot at the Exit 8, just in a mall corridor rather than a subway. The anomalies themselves also weren't all that great. Not as much grand trippy imagery or even particularly spooky encounters. Just a bit of a middle-of-the-road experience that doesn't do much to stand out from its peers. Everyone has their comfort zone when it comes to games, I think most people can admit that, and for me, it's 3D collectathon platformers. In this day and age, it's hard to think back to how between 2006 and 2016, 3D platformers were pretty much dead if your name wasn't Mario or Sonic. Choices for new games in the genre were so dire that you had people gassing up stuff like The Last Tinker City of Colors, a game that didn't even have a jump button, because folks were that desperate. But then you had Yooka-Laylee and A Hat in Time come out in 2017, and that opened up the floodgates for tons of developers, realizing that there was still a huge market for people wanting to play good old-fashioned mascot platformers, and now there are so many of them that it's hard to keep track. Most of them I played aren't half bad either. The next one picked up from my more recent batch of chambered Steam wishlist games is Teeto. Something I hadn't noticed until actually playing it was that it was actually made by a couple of folks from New Zealand, so hey, giving a bit of rep for my homeland here. A recurring NPC is a kiriru, which is one of our native birds, and one of the achievements for breaking a bunch of boxes is even called Crate Day, which is hilarious. If you needed any proof that this country has a collective drinking problem, we have a whole holiday dedicated to getting on the piss. Much like the tickies from the reignited version of Spyro Year of the Dragon, it's still weird hearing dialect in games that I'm used to in my everyday life.
On today's episode, Chris, you want to chat about the best chip and which one you like to steal?
Yeah, Ellie, I guess with this idea, I was just really having to think, because obviously we got to eat 3 meals a day, don't we? You've got your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner. And when I'm swooping for dinner, I want to make sure that the chip that I'm swooping down on isn't like a crusty, really crunchy, over-fried number. I want to swoop down on a large, preferably, sort of 10 centimeters at least, or however long that is in gull measurements. I want to swoop down something like that, take it away, a bit of sauce on there, a little bit of salt.
Nice.
That's what I'm after, yeah. What kind of chips are you guys into?
Teeto starts us with a toy bunny named Nori creating the eponymous character in a lab, filling us in that some weird calamity has made all the humans disappear and unleashed an army of shadow creatures across the land, causing mischief. We must journey cross-continent to reach the origin point and find a way to fix all this. Teeto is basically blue flubber, but with the ability to absorb the attributes of elements in the environment to gain new situational abilities, ranging from pretty neat reversal abilities, contextual interactions to access pathways and reveal secrets, to combat abilities that don't really make a lot of difference because regular old Teeto is plenty capable and the enemies in this game are kinda pathetic. Teeto falls into the category of 3D platformer where you come across a series of objectives in the world given to you by passing NPCs, on top of finding the MacGuffins of choice out in the wild. The primary collectibles are these pink icosahedrons called Vionite. They're the power stars, the jiggies, the power cells, the golden spatulas of the game, which you'll find as the primary collectibles required to progress. Secondary are some tiny blobs similar to Teeto called Michaels. These are like if you cross Chow from Sonic Adventure with Jinjos from Banjo-Kazooie. They all give some verbal indication when they're nearby, and they're all represented with unique costumes which are pretty cute. And there's 67 of them in total, I just know you fuckers did that on purpose. There's also stars, which serve as both currency and have a threshold to collect in each level. Think of them like studs from the Traveller's Tales LEGO games, except you don't lose a bunch of them whenever you die. The store only has costumes to offer though. I mean, costumes are cool and all, but why is it that so many platforms these days only offer costumes and skins as rewards for this kind of thing? What about power-ups, progress gates for bonus levels, modifiers, concept art, or, I don't know, toggleable cheats that you can just mess around and have fun with? Oh right, sorry, they're called accessibility options these days. My bad. Controls here are very satisfying. Smooth movement with tons of options to string together. Even dodge rolling to get around easier is one of the fastest examples of it I've ever seen. Wall jumping can feel a little awkward at times if the camera is on too much of a slant, and forward momentum for jumps is incredibly gimped if you're trying to jump from a standstill, which can make some platforming sections a little problematic. But that's about the only gripes I can think of. The rest of it handles like a dream. Levels are separated stage by stage, but thematically do transition into each other well, rather than being a disparate collection of themes. Always a fan of that extra attention to detail. The visuals and environments look great too. Very clean and subtle cel-shaded look full of colours that pop. The sense of scale is pretty good too, making for several areas that have some great views. It's also another one of those games that throw you into real-world environments from the perspective of a smaller protagonist, which is one of my favourite design tropes of all time. The levels set in suburbia especially, like the grocery store, the house, and the neighbourhood backyards make me think a lot of the Toy Story 2 tie-in game, just with much better controls. I found the quality of the levels dipped a bit in the last act, unfortunately. Level theming stopped being as varied, and the more true-to-life level layouts gave way to a whole lot of platforms hovering over voids. I have a whole bunch of collectathon platformers that I like to replay on lazy days just to kick back and 100% while watching TV or something, and I enjoy Teeto enough that I can see it earning a spot in that lineup. This game was also published by Super Rare Games, so if a physical version gets the green light then I'll happily double dip to show my fellow Kiwis some love. Preferably on the Switch too though, because Sony are dead to me at this point. During my coverage of Space Rock Breaker, I said I wanted to avoid playing too many incremental games unless I could find something a bit more interesting to actually talk about. I guess this one counts. Unfair Flips is a bit more of a subversive approach to the incremental game, in that it's about the most boiled down approach you can get to an already boiled down genre. It's pretty much straight probability. You have a coin to flip with the objective of getting it to land on heads 9 times in a row. The only problem is that the coin starts out with the odds overwhelmingly skewed against you. To improve your chances of winning, you need to keep landing on heads to gain currency and spend on boosts. These include an increase to the odds of getting heads, how fast the coin flips, a score multiplier for when you get multiple heads in a row, and lastly one to increase the value of the coin to give bigger payouts with each heads that you get. The game holds a promise of 5 different possible endings when you reach 9 heads in a row to give you something to work towards, but that's really all there is to it. They truly do show how much of this game is left up to chance. The first ending I got was the one for landing on 10 heads in a row, which has a 10% chance of showing up. My first 2 runs reached an ending after a bit over 2,000 flips, and I still got lucky and ended up getting my third ending on 800 flips, when my heads probability was still only 40%. Your enjoyment of this will come down entirely to how much you value the innate interest of seeing probability play out. I myself got really into it, but I'm also one of those weirdos that considers grinding in most games to be an oddly zen experience, so your mileage may vary. I'm a very patient man. If a game about flipping a coin over and over again somehow sounds kind of interesting to you and you're the same brand of deeply broken that I am, then you may as well give this a look. It only costs about the same as the coin that you're flipping. Like many guys my age who got super into Yu-Gi-Oh back in the early 2000s, there's a pretty good chance that outside of the TV show and the card game itself, that your first video game related to the series was Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories for the PlayStation 1. This is one I sunk many hours into back in 2003 but never actually finished, so I thought it was time to pick it up again and take another whack at it. The story is set in an alternate timeline with a different series of events from anything seen in the manga or anime. It's separated into 3 distinct parts, starting out in ancient Egypt playing as the young Prince Atem experiencing an insurrection by the High Mage Haitian? I've never been sure how this is pronounced, seeking to take the prince's Millennium Puzzle for his own gain. The prince smashes the puzzle to foil his schemes and locks his spirit inside for 1,000 years. Jumping forth to the modern day, we're thrown into a small-scale tournament. It's not quite Duelist Kingdom since Pegasus is the third from last battle with no greater plot relevance, and it's not quite Battle City since Shadi and Ishizu, Isis, appear here, but with no mention of Marek. Much of the cast of the original series are here in a support role, except for Tristan at least. He must have slept in that day. A line here that has always stuck with me is Joey talking down the announcer by saying, "Who cares about rules? All you have to do is keep winning." You work your way through the tournament and end up nicking everyone's Millennium items during the finals, with Kaiba having the Millennium Rod in place of Marek for some reason. Assembling all these allows Yugi to get in contact with the spirit of Atem and reawaken him back in ancient Egypt, living out the titular Forbidden Memories. Upon your return, the mages have left the land a wreck, leaving you to face all of them, collect the Millennium items in their possession, and then go off to confront Haitian to stop him from summoning an ancient evil. Thankfully not the one with a dragon for a penis. Yeah, very much playing it fast and loose with the established story when it's even coming remotely close. Not like it made much of a difference. When this game came out, the TV show was still in mid-Battle City. Much like the first season of the anime, this game barely plays like the actual card game at all. Tributes aren't a thing, so you can summon whatever you want. You can only play 1 card from your hand per turn, and monster effects are non-existent. On the other hand, this game brought with it plenty of unique quirks that weren't seen anywhere else. There was a layer of strategy introduced with the Guardian Star system. Each monster card carried with it 2 astral attributes which can be assigned to them when summoned. Each of these have an innate advantage and disadvantage over other Guardian Stars. When 2 cards clash, if one has an advantageous Guardian Star, it gains an additional 500 attack and defense boost for that particular battle, which can entirely change the outcome of the fight. The other big feature that everyone remembers this game for is the fusion system. Rather than set monsters that can be combined to summon a specific new monster using polymerization, monsters in this game can be selected from the hand or placed onto something on the field to merge into another stronger creature if the attributes are compatible. The meta that pretty much everyone figured out by themselves was the strongest monster that could be created with the largest variety of cards available to you since the early game, combining a lightning type monster with a dragon to create the legendary twin-headed Thunder Dragon. This thing is pretty much going to be your ace in the hole through the entire game, so having multiple monsters that can create this plus a bunch of magic cards that can buff it are a must. But I guess that brings me to the big reason I'm covering this here. This is like the ultimate example of a game that pretty much everyone played but very few have actually beaten. Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories gets really fucking hard. There are many aspects of this game that really feel like it was a rush job because this is one of the most poorly balanced experiences I've ever played. When you start the game out, your deck is garbage. A big selection of Legend of Blue-Eyes era trash, where if you have anything 1000 attack or above, or a Raigeki, those are considered a huge advantage. Though the problem is, without a shit ton of grinding, this doesn't get much better. With how much you need to rely on fusions and how infrequently you find any new cards worth a damn, you could find yourself in the endgame still with a few sub 1000 attack monsters in your deck. There were hundreds of cards you could get in this game, but collecting them all legitimately is probably nothing you'd ever be able to do. You only get one prize card per duel, which is dependent entirely on the rank you get. You also get star chips after a win, which act as currency in this game, anywhere from 1 to 5 depending on how well you performed. These can be used to purchase cards from the password screen using the 8-digit codes that come with many of the actual ones in the card game. Good fucking luck getting anything worthwhile from this though. There are some lower tier cards that you can easily afford with a spot of grinding in free duel mode, with many ranging from 15 to 70 star chips each. Jirai Gumo is some of the best value as far as raw power goes, since it's 2200 attack with none of the drawbacks of the real card. But let's say you're in the second half of the game and want the upper hand against guys regularly summoning monsters with 2500 attack and above. We're gonna need a Blue-Eyes White Dragon for this one. Okay, that's not happening. Well, maybe we can step things down a notch with a Red-Eyes Black Dragon. Well shit. Okay, how about another Raigeki to have on hand just in case of emergency? Oh, you've gotta be kidding me. There even seems to be attacks on recognizable monsters from the show. What do you mean Time Wizard and Baby Friggin' Dragon cost max star chips? I already got 2 Time Wizards from battling Simon Moran during the early game. Actually, I'll do you one better. What possible reason could there be for Cockroach Knight needing to cost max star chips? This is the worst in-game economy I've ever seen. Like, with the amount of junk cards I get from winning duels, could I at least have the option to sell these for star chips or something? Surely that wouldn't break the game that much. This is definitely the biggest drawback of the password feature in this game. Of all the cards in this game that could be obtained through a code, just about every one worth a damn costs max star chips. They barely even tried implementing a reasonable pricing system. Like, look at it this way, you get a maximum of 5 star chips from winning a duel if you perform well. People have already done the maths, and getting 999k star chips would require 200,000 duels minimum, estimated to take over 6,000 hours. This isn't accounting for balance to keep the player from cheesing the game, this is just taking the piss. Regardless, with some of your winnings and building a deck around Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon, it's easy enough to finish the first Egypt section and the modern day tournament with a bit of trial and error. But the second pass of Egypt is where things start getting serious. I still remember the first time I got to Ancient Egypt again. The first thing I did was challenge Jono, he got his red eyes out turn 1, I was getting shit for cards, and I lost. This ended up kicking me back to the tournament and I had to beat Kaiba all over again. It does that old school RPG thing of where if you lose a duel, you get a game over and have to go back to the title screen. This also ties into what ends up being the run killer for most people. The very end of the game, after countless challenges battling the different low and high mages, is one final gauntlet. One long string of back-to-back fights of the same difficulty as the mages, progressively getting worse towards the end, with no chance to save until it's over. You have to fight not 1, not 2 or 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, but 7 of these guys back to back. In my attempts back in the day, the furthest I ever made it through pure luck was making it to the fight with Seto, only to get immediately trampled when he summoned Blue-Eyes Ultimate Dragon on the first turn. That happens with a lot of these fights, especially with the last 3. If you don't have the means to get a Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon buffed to over 4500 attack or even a Widespread Ruin on your first turn, there's a very good chance you're not going to make it. These guys have all of the most powerful monsters in the game that they will very frequently throw out on their first turns. No need for rituals, no need for tributes. The kind of cards that the player has no means of getting without cheating, because getting the cards themselves is impossible, and actually pulling off ritual summons this late in the game is a fool's errand. This entire last section is one big game of praying to Iron Jesus, and it sucks. But I did it. After all these years, I finally actually made it to the end. I had a decent lineup of support monsters, tons of equip cards to buff Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon, and a few copies of Megamorph and Widespread Ruin thanks to hours of fighting Pegasus over and over. I will give one bit of unconditional praise to this game though. It has one of my favourite soundtracks of all time, just absolutely phenomenal stuff. If you've watched any of my long-form videos, you've probably already heard a few of them. But man, Card Shop, Library, Inside the Puzzle, Preliminaries, just some solid gold tunes. Spending hours grinding in Free Duel has a lot of the edge taken off when you get to hear the battle theme the whole way through. Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories is something I have fond, well, memories of. It has a very unique approach to the standard Yu-Gi-Oh! Format and one of my favourite soundtracks of all time. Regular duels against foes that aren't hilariously overpowered is still a lot of fun, and I enjoyed coming back to it after all these years. But let's face the facts here. This game's difficulty curve is a bad joke. Beating it legitimately is such a crapshoot that even the speedrunning community for it is 99% grappling with RNG, all for good drops and hoping the late game battles don't top deck a BlueKunai's Ultimate and Megamorph on the first turn. I beat Duelist of the Roses just fine back in the day, and many people consider that one pretty tough too, but it's very doable. Forbidden Memories, however, is beyond unfair. Unless you already enjoyed it growing up or have a love for grinding, it's a tough one to recommend. And that's going to be it for this part. Progress had slowed down for a couple of weeks there with getting my new PC set up and everything, many little hitches holding up progress and developing a newfound hatred for my local post office. But everything is now as it should be, and it's been wonderful. It's instilled me with excitement knowing there are many games past, present, and future I'll finally be able to tackle without my inability to run it being a factor anymore. I've also reignited my love for emulation and have amassed a huge collection of ROMs to play, a collection of games I already own but haven't gotten around to, and others I had a passing curiosity in but not enough to go hunting down a physical copy. Since I have them easily on tap now and can actually record my own footage for them, I think next time I'll try to devote some more spots to some pre-7th gen titles for old time's sake. And if I ever figure out a streaming setup, then this will also give me plenty of opportunities to do playthroughs of some old games I'm very familiar with, which I'm sure could be good fun. Tombi Duology Retro Achievements playthroughs, anyone? But until then, that's all for now. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Whenever that may be.